Princess Illyra stood on the balcony of her warship, gazing at the blue-green planet below. Another world, another mission. She was the heir to the Xanthari Empire, a warrior feared across the galaxy. No enemy had ever defeated her. No challenge had ever shaken her. She had conquered countless planets, and today she arrived at Earth, not as a conqueror, but for a diplomatic meeting. She found it amusing. The humans were weak, far behind in technology, yet they still thought they had a say in the affairs of the galaxy. Her people had no real interest in Earth, but alliances had to be formed, and she had been sent to establish one. The landing platform was crowded when she stepped out of her ship. Human soldiers stood in formation, their weapons holstered, while government officials awaited her arrival. But Illyra ignored them all. She had been through this process many times before. It was always the same nervous diplomats, eager to impress her, desperate to gain favor with the mighty Xanthari. But then she saw him. Among the officials stood a man who did not bow. He did not lower his head or show fear like the others. Instead, he watched her with calm, steady eyes. He was not dressed like the leaders, no fine suit or decorative medals. Just a simple uniform, practical and unassuming. His stance was relaxed, but there was something about him that caught her attention. Illyra narrowed her eyes. "Who is that?" she asked one of her guards. The Xanthari soldier checked a small device. Daniel Carter, captain in Earth's Defense Force, assigned as a military advisor for this meeting. Illyra smirked. A mere soldier. How amusing. She approached the human delegation, her long cape flowing behind her. The Earth's leaders bowed deeply. "Princess Illyra, we welcome you to our planet," one of them said. Daniel did not bow. Illyra turned to him, her golden eyes flashing with curiosity. "Do you not kneel before Xanthari, princess?" Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "Respect is given, not demanded," he replied simply. The officials around him turned pale, their nervous glances darting between the princess and the human who had dared to defy her. Silence filled the air. No one had ever spoken to Illyra like that before. For a moment, she considered teaching him a lesson, but instead of anger, she felt something unexpected. Intrigue. "Interesting," she murmured, a small smile forming on her lips. Daniel did not react. He simply stood his ground, unfazed by the alien princess before him. For the first time in her life, Illyra had met someone who did not fear her, and for reasons she could not yet understand, that unsettled her more than any battle ever had. The meeting was nothing like Illyra had expected. Earth's leaders, all eager to please her, spoke in endless praises of the Xanthari Empire, promising peace, trade, and cooperation. But through it all, her thoughts kept drifting to one person, Daniel Carter. He stood there, quiet and observant, only speaking when absolutely necessary. He didn't try to impress her with false words, nor did he show any fear. Illyra found this both frustrating and fascinating. Why was he so different? The hours dragged on as Illyra listened to speeches and proposals. The humans seemed eager to please her, but her mind wandered. She couldn't help but glance at Daniel. Every time their eyes met, there was something in his gaze, something challenging, yet calm. It was as if he could see right through her, not as the princess of a mighty empire, but as a person. At one point, Illyra's patience snapped. The discussions were growing tiresome, and she had heard the same promises from dozens of other planets. "Enough," she said, cutting off the human leader mid-sentence. Her voice echoed across the room. The room fell silent. "We all know why I am here," Illyra continued, her gaze sweeping over the room. "You want an alliance with the Xanthari Empire. But talk is cheap. I've seen this game played before. What I want to know is this. What can Earth offer me that will make it worth my time?" The human officials shifted uncomfortably. They began to speak, offering new ideas, new resources, but Illyra wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel, who had not spoken a word. "Captain Carter," she said, her tone colder now. You have remained quiet throughout this whole charade. Perhaps you have something to say." Daniel looked at her, his expression calm. "I don't speak unless I have something worth saying, Princess." A flash of anger surged in Tylera, but she controlled it. "You're a soldier, a simple human with no political experience. What do you know of ruling, of power?" Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "I know that power isn't just about dominating others. True power comes from understanding people, from knowing when to listen." Tylera felt something stir within her. No one had ever spoken to her like this, especially not in her own palace. Most feared to challenge her authority, but Daniel didn't seem afraid at all. Instead, he seemed to believe that his words held weight. "Are you saying that I don't understand people?" she asked, her voice dropping. She was testing him now, curious to see how far he would go. "I'm saying that there's more to ruling than strength," Daniel replied simply. "You've conquered worlds, but you don't know Earth. You don't understand what it means to fight for something that matters to you." Tylera felt her anger flare again, but this time it was mixed with something else, something she didn't want to admit. Was he right? Did she really understand Earth, or was she just here for the glory of another victory? "Your kind might not like it," Daniel added, his tone softening, "but the strongest leaders are those who lead by understanding, not just by fear." The room was still. Tylera stood there, staring at the man who had dared to question her. His words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she had all the answers. The days following their tense meeting were filled with more political discussions, but Tylera's thoughts never strayed far from Daniel Carter. His words still echoed in her mind, stirring something deep within her, something she wasn't ready to face. The idea that power wasn't just about strength was foreign to her, but something about it felt right. She couldn't help but observe him during the following sessions. Daniel seemed to be everywhere, always in the background, watching, analyzing. He never said much, but he always seemed to be thinking, weighing every situation with a calmness Tylera couldn't ignore. Then, on the 4th day of her visit to Earth, disaster struck. Tylera had attended a public event, a large outdoor gathering to discuss trade between the Xanthari and the humans. The event was peaceful, with hundreds of humans and officials in attendance. But the calm was shattered in an instant. An explosion rang out from the crowd. It was deafening. Tylera's eyes darted to the source, her enhanced reflexes immediately kicking in. She raised a hand to shield her face from the shockwave, her soldiers rushing to her side. But before they could react, more explosions erupted. Chaos spread like wildfire. Screams filled the air as people scrambled for safety. Tylera's mind raced. She had trained for this. Countless battles, countless escapes. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a human city with civilians caught in the middle. She had to get to safety, but her mind screamed at her to help. "Princess, we need to leave," one of her guards shouted, but she didn't listen. She could feel the danger closing in, but there was no time to think. As she moved toward the exit, a sudden force slammed her into the ground. Her vision blurred as debris rained down. It happened so fast. Just as she tried to push herself up, a figure appeared in her peripheral vision. It was Daniel. Without a second thought, Daniel grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to her feet, his face a mask of determination. "This way," he shouted, urging her forward. Tylera, stunned by his sudden appearance, tried to protest, but he didn't give her the chance. "Follow me if you want to live," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic around them. They sprinted through the chaos, Daniel leading the way. Tylera's enhanced senses were on high alert, her sharp eyes scanning for threats, but it was clear that Daniel was the one who knew the safest path through the madness. They reached a side alley, and Daniel quickly ducked behind a building. He didn't stop running until they were deep within the city's underbelly, hidden away from the danger. Tylera was breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through her. She couldn't believe it. She had been in more dangerous situations than this before, Yet it had been a human who had saved her. Daniel stepped back, allowing her a moment to catch her breath. "You all right, Princess?" he asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. Thylara stared at him, still in shock. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you're more than just a title, Princess. You're a person, and I don't leave people behind." For a moment, Thylara stood there, speechless. She had always believed in her own strength, in her ability to survive, but Daniel had done something she could never have expected. He had protected her, not because of her status, but because he saw her as something more. This human, whom she had dismissed so easily, had just turned her world upside down. The days after the explosion were filled with tension. Princess Thylara had never experienced fear the way she had during the attack. She had fought in battles, survived ambushes, and faced terrifying enemies, but never had she felt so vulnerable. And yet it wasn't the explosion itself that troubled her most. It was the human who had saved her. Daniel Carter. He had appeared from nowhere, pulled her to safety without hesitation, and led her through the chaos like it was nothing. Thylara was no stranger to courage, but there was something different about Daniel. He didn't seem to act out of duty or fear. He acted out of something else, something Thylara couldn't name. She had spent years being praised, worshipped even, for her strength and leadership. She had been taught that vulnerability was a weakness, something to be hidden, never shown. But now, here was a human, not even a soldier, who had risked his life for her, and she hadn't even asked. Thylara sat in her private chamber, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her advisors had arrived to debrief her, but their words felt distant, as if they were coming from a far-off place. They spoke of securing the planet, of investigating the terrorists who had tried to assassinate her. But Thylara barely heard them. Her mind kept drifting back to Daniel, to his words and actions. "Princess, are you listening?" One of her closest advisors, General Kale, asked, a sharp edge to his voice. Thylara blinked and refocused on him. "Of course, General. I'm just processing everything." Kale exchanged a glance with the others. "We need to move quickly. The humans have proven to be unreliable in this matter. They allowed terrorists to get this close to you. They are not trustworthy." Thylara stood up, her eyes cold. "And what do you suggest we do? Bomb their cities? Conquer their lands?" Cal's eyes narrowed. "We have the power, Princess. We could take control of their entire planet if we wished." Thylara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had heard these words before. Her empire had conquered world after world, expanding its borders through strength, fear, and dominance. But after what Daniel had done for her, she found herself questioning everything. Was that really the right way? Thylara turned away from her advisors, looking out the window at the earth below. She had come here to forge an alliance, to gain control, but now she felt trapped. The old ways, the ways that had made her the most feared warrior in the galaxy, no longer seemed to make sense. "Princess." Kel's voice was urgent. "We cannot trust these humans. They are weak. You know this." She shook her head. "Perhaps they're not as weak as you think." The room fell silent, and Thylara could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances. "What are you saying, Princess?" Kale asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Thylara took a deep breath. "I'm saying, maybe we need to approach this differently. Perhaps understanding, not just strength, is the key here." She paused, and her thoughts drifted back to Daniel, the human who had stood beside her when no one else would, the human who had seen her as something more than a princess. For the first time in her life, Thylara wasn't sure of the right answer. But she knew one thing. The world she had known, the world of power and dominance, wasn't the only way. And for the first time, she was beginning to wonder if Daniel had been right all along. Thylara had never felt so conflicted. The attack on the event, her narrow escape, and Daniel's unexpected rescue kept replaying in her mind. The fear she had felt, fear for herself, for her people, had opened her eyes to something she had never fully understood. There was more to life than conquest, more to leadership than simply ruling through strength. But the words of her advisors, especially General Kale, weighed heavily on her mind. "Destroy them all, Princess," Kale had said more than once, urging her to seize Earth for herself. "They are weak. Their resources are ours for the taking." She had dismissed him at first, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She couldn't ignore it now. If Kale had his way, Silura would turn her back on diplomacy and humanity. She would crush the humans under her boot like any other planet she had conquered. The thought made her uneasy, but she couldn't yet explain why. She sat alone in her quarters, her thoughts spinning. Her guards were outside, as always, ensuring her safety. Daniel had left after their brief conversation, respecting her need for solitude. The human had a way of knowing when to leave her be, never pushing her when she needed space. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed at the door. "Enter," she called, her voice steady. The door slid open, and to her surprise, it was Daniel who stepped inside. He looked at her with a steady gaze, but there was something different in his expression, something serious. "I need to talk to you, Princess," Daniel said, his tone firm but respectful. Silura nodded and gestured for him to sit. "What is it, Captain Carter?" "Something's not right," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. "I've been digging into the events surrounding the attack. It wasn't a random group of terrorists. Someone on your side helped them." Silura's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure yet," Daniel said, "but I found a trail. And I think you need to look into it yourself. Someone within your ranks might be feeding information to your enemies." Silura's pulse quickened. "Are you suggesting that my own people are betraying me?" Daniel met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I know it's hard to believe, but think about it. The attack was too well-timed, too organized. It wasn't just a random attack." Silura stood up, pacing. But who would dare betray the Xanthari princess? She had trusted her advisors, especially General Kale. He had always been by her side, loyal and stern. The idea that one of them could be involved in such treachery seemed impossible, but Daniel's words had planted a seed of doubt. "I need to look into this myself," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. Daniel nodded. "I'll help you, Princess, but you need to be careful. Whoever is behind this is dangerous, and they'll stop at nothing to take you down." Silura turned to face him, her jaw clenched. "I won't be taken down. Not by anyone, human or alien." She trusted Daniel more than she had ever trusted anyone, and for the first time, she was willing to believe that her instincts had been right. She was not the only one in danger. The very people she had called allies might be plotting against her. As Silura made her decision, she felt something stir deep inside her. It was the same fire she had felt on the battlefield, the same drive to protect what was hers. But now, it was no longer about a throne or a title. It was about her life, her future, and the fragile trust she had begun to build with the human who had saved her. She would find the traitor, and she would not let anyone destroy the alliance she was trying to build. The moment Silura decided to investigate the betrayal, everything changed. She knew she couldn't trust her advisors or anyone in her inner circle until she uncovered the truth. Daniel had given her a starting point, but now she had to do the work herself. The first step was clear. She had to leave the palace and go underground, where the traitor couldn't find her. The palace, with its walls filled with secrets, no longer felt like a safe place. Silura trusted few people. Her mind constantly returned to General Kale. He had always been loyal, but his suggestion to conquer Earth felt more like a warning now, a sign that he might not have the best interests of the Empire, or her, at heart. Silura summoned Daniel to her private chambers. His quiet strength had become an anchor in the storm that was her life. He had no reason to help her, yet he had. She couldn't ignore the bond that had started to form between them, a connection that went beyond politics, beyond alliances. He was someone who had shown her the kind of loyalty she'd never expected from a human. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady but urgent, "we have to leave tonight. We're not safe here anymore." Daniel looked at her with a mix of concern and determination. "I've been ready for this, Princess. We'll leave at once." They left the palace under the cover of darkness, moving quietly through hidden passages that Sci-Fi had never used before. The security systems had been shut down, allowing them to slip past unnoticed. She had never thought she would need to rely on a human to escape her own home. But here they were, together, on the run from enemies she couldn't even trust. As they made their way through the streets of the capital, Sci-Fi's senses were on high alert. She had been trained to see danger everywhere, but now it was more than just threats from enemies. It was the feeling of being betrayed by her own people. She couldn't shake the thought that someone who had sworn loyalty to her was now working against her. The night air was cool, and the city seemed unusually quiet as they moved through the shadows. Daniel led the way, navigating through the unfamiliar alleys with ease. Sci-Fi marveled at his calmness. Despite the danger, he never seemed rattled. He was a soldier, but more than that, he was resourceful. And in this moment, she found herself relying on him more than she ever had on anyone. "Where are we headed?" Sci-Fi asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "We're going to a safe house," Daniel replied. "A place I trust. It's not far." Sci-Fi nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had spent her entire life preparing for war, for leadership, for power. But none of that had prepared her for the feeling of uncertainty, the vulnerability she now faced. She had been strong all her life, but it was clear to her now that strength alone wasn't enough. It took more than strength to survive in this galaxy. It took trust. And for the first time, Sci-Fi found herself trusting a human. The thought was unsettling, but in a strange way, it comforted her too. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help from someone who saw her as more than just a princess. As they reached the safe house, Daniel turned to her. "You're safe here. For now." Sci-Fi didn't speak immediately. She simply stared at him, seeing him not just as a human, but as a partner in this journey. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel smiled. "You don't have to thank me, Princess. I'm not doing this for your title. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." And in that moment, Sci-Fi realized something important. It wasn't just about saving her throne or her empire. It was about saving herself. And she had no idea where this journey would take her, but she was ready to walk it with Daniel by her side. Sci-Fi sat quietly in the safe house, the dim light casting shadows on her face. The weight of the last few days hung over her like a storm cloud. Her empire was in turmoil, her trust shattered. And yet, she had never felt more alive. Daniel's presence beside her brought an unexpected sense of calm, a sense of security she had never known. He wasn't just protecting her. He was helping her find a way out of the mess she had created. The room was small but well fortified, tucked away in an old warehouse on the outskirts of the capital. There was no luxury here, no royal comforts, but Sci-Fi found that she didn't mind. The simplicity of it felt almost freeing. She could think here, focus on the next steps without the distractions of her former life. Daniel had spread out a map on the table before her, pointing to key locations across Earth's capital. "We need to get more information on Kel. He's the one behind all of this. We can't risk him getting to you first." Sci-Fi studied the map, trying to focus on the task at hand. The map showed a series of safe houses, secret routes, and areas that Kel's men had control of. "You've been tracking him?" she asked, genuinely impressed. Daniel nodded. "I've been following the money trail. There's a reason Kel's been acting strange. His contacts go deeper than just the political faction on Earth. Someone's been funding him. If we find who's behind that, we can stop him before he has a chance to strike." Sci-Fi's mind raced. She had always been the one who planned the strategies, the one who led the charge. But now, it was Daniel, the human, who was acting as the strategist. It was strange for her to admit, but she was learning from him. The way he thought, the way he saw the pieces of the puzzle fit together. She had never encountered anyone quite like him. "We'll need to move fast," Scylla said. "Kel won't stop until he has the throne. I won't give it to him without a fight." Daniel smiled, a rare, almost approving smile. "I didn't think you would, but we can't just rely on force. We'll need to outsmart him. If he thinks we're predictable, we'll lose." Scylla met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "I've been a warrior my whole life. I know how to fight." "And you're great at it," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But this is different. This isn't about brute strength. It's about keeping your enemies off balance. We need to make them think you're weaker than you really are. Let them underestimate us." Scylla considered his words carefully. She had always been the one to charge headfirst into battle, relying on her strength and her power. But Daniel was telling her to use her mind, to outwit her enemies instead of overpowering them. The idea felt strange, but in this moment, she trusted him. "All right," Scylla said, determination in her voice. "We'll play their game, but on our terms." Daniel nodded. "That's the spirit. But we'll need to make sure we have allies in the right places. If we have the right support, Kel won't stand a chance." Scylla leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the map. For the first time in days, she felt the spark of hope again. The path ahead was uncertain, but with Daniel by her side, she felt like they had a chance. They had to be smarter than Kel. They had to think 3 steps ahead. "You're right," she said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Let's show them what we're really made of." Daniel returned her smile, his eyes gleaming with determination. "I knew I was right to bet on you." Scylla glanced at him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. She had expected a soldier to speak in terms of duty. But Daniel wasn't like anyone she had known. He was more than just a warrior. He was someone who saw the bigger picture, someone who believed in something more than power. For the first time in her life, Scylla wasn't fighting alone. She had found a partner, a strategist, and a friend in a human who had turned her world upside down. They would fight together, and they would win. The city was dark, the streets quiet except for the occasional hum of distant vehicles. Scylla and Daniel had spent days preparing for this moment. The plan was set, and everything hinged on their ability to outwit General Kale. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, and they would be lost. Scylla looked at Daniel, who was standing across from her, his eyes scanning the shadows, always alert. "Are you sure we can trust the information we have?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Daniel nodded without hesitation. "It's solid. Cal's been moving around too much, and he's been too quiet. He's up to something, and we're going to be the ones to find out what." Scylla's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just another battle. This was a fight for her future. For the first time, she wasn't just worried about power or control. She was worried about what would happen to her people, her empire, if Kale succeeded. They approached the main building, a hidden compound on the outskirts of the capital, where Kale had been meeting with his allies. The structure was heavily guarded, but they had a plan. The plan was simple: infiltrate, gather information, and get out without being detected. Daniel had scouted the area in advance, finding the weakest points in the security system. "This is it," Daniel said as they reached the entrance. "Stay close to me. We move fast." Scylla nodded, her hands tightening around the weapons she had brought. Tools of war she had never expected to use on a mission like this. She wasn't used to sneaking around or hiding in the shadows. She had always been the one charging into the battle, her enemies fearing her strength. But tonight, she would need to use her mind and Daniel's skills to survive. They slipped past the guards, using the shadows to their advantage. The compound was quiet, too quiet. Scylla could sense the tension in the air. Every corner they turned, every door they opened, felt like it could lead to danger. But they kept moving, one step at a time, until they reached the inner chambers of the building. Daniel paused, holding up a hand. "This is it," he whispered. "Cal's office is right through that door. We need to find proof of his betrayal. Everything else comes after." Thylara nodded, her pulse quickening. She had no doubt in her mind that Cal had been behind the assassination attempt, but now they needed the evidence to expose him for good. They moved silently through the door, entering a dark, spacious room filled with maps and documents. The walls were lined with data terminals, all displaying encrypted information. Thylara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They were so close, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. A voice echoed through the room, low and cold. "I knew you would come, Princess." Thylara turned, her heart sinking. Standing in the doorway was General Cal, flanked by a group of armed soldiers. His smile was twisted, his eyes cold. "You think you can outsmart me?" Cal sneered. "You were always too naive, Thylara. Did you really think I wouldn't know you were coming?" Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself in front of Thylara, his hand on his weapon. "You're not getting away with this, Cal," he said, his voice steady. Cal's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've just walked into." Thylara didn't wait for him to finish. With a sudden move, she reached for her blade, prepared to fight for her life and for her future. But in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't fighting alone. For the first time, she wasn't the only one carrying the weight of an empire on her shoulders. She had Daniel by her side. And together, they would stop Cal, no matter the cost. The reckoning had begun. The air was thick with tension. Cal's smug expression faltered for just a moment as Thylara's blade flashed in the dim light, her eyes burning with determination. Daniel stood beside her, his weapon drawn, ready to fight. They were vastly outnumbered, but Thylara had faced impossible odds before. This time, however, it was different. She wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting for something more. Her future, her people, and her place in the galaxy. Cal's voice cut through the silence. "You think you can defeat me, Princess? You've made a mistake coming here." Thylara didn't answer. She lunged at him with a speed that even the best soldiers would have struggled to match. Cal barely had time to react, raising his own weapon in defense. The two clashed, the sound of metal meeting metal echoing through the room. Daniel moved quickly, taking on the soldiers who had followed Cal into the room. Each blow he struck was calculated, precise, like he had been fighting beside Thylara for years. Thylara's heart raced as she fought, but she was calm, calmer than she had ever been in battle. It wasn't just her strength that made her powerful. It was her focus, her ability to see the bigger picture. And right now, that picture was clear. Cal was not just a traitor. He was a symbol of everything that had been wrong with the way she had ruled her empire for so long. His methods, brutal, calculating, and power-hungry, were what she had once believed in, but no more. The fight continued, the clash of weapons ringing out. Cal's soldiers were no match for Daniel's quick thinking, and Thylara's relentless skill. One by one, they fell. Daniel moved like a shadow, taking down opponents with ease. But Thylara's mind wasn't entirely on the fight. Her eyes were fixed on Cal, whose arrogance had begun to crack. She saw the moment of hesitation. It was brief, but it was there. Cal had realized that he wasn't going to win this. He wasn't going to be the one to rule. Thylara was stronger than he had ever believed, and she wasn't alone. With a swift, powerful motion, Thylara disarmed Cal, sending his weapon skittering across the floor. She stood over him, her breathing heavy but steady. "It's over, Cal," she said, her voice cold. "You've lost." Cal looked up at her, fury and fear in his eyes. "You don't understand," he spat. "The Empire needs someone strong. You're weak, Thylara. You always have been. Scylla's gaze softened, just for a moment. She had spent her entire life believing that strength was the key to everything. It had been her shield, her weapon, and her burden. But now she understood. Real strength wasn't in domination. It was in the ability to change, to grow, to listen. She had learned that from Daniel. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I understand now. Strength isn't about ruling through fear. It's about leading with integrity, with respect. And that's what I'll do." Kale sneered, but he was defeated. There was nothing left for him. Scylla turned away, signaling Daniel to stand down. The fight was over, and Kale would face justice. As the room grew quiet, Scylla felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The battle wasn't just won on the physical plane. It had been won in her heart, in her understanding of what it truly meant to be a leader. She was no longer the invincible princess who ruled through fear. She was something more, a leader who would guide her people with wisdom, compassion, and strength. Daniel stepped beside her, his expression one of quiet approval. "You did it," he said simply. Scylla nodded, feeling the strange peace settle within her. She had changed, and in that change, she had found something more powerful than any throne. She had found herself, and with Daniel by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The quiet that followed the battle was almost surreal. Kale, now taken into custody, was no longer a threat. His followers, broken and defeated, had been rounded up. The compound, once a place of conspiracy and betrayal, was now under Scylla's control. But despite the victory, Scylla couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had been won within herself. She stood alone on the balcony of the building, the bright lights of the capital stretching out before her. The city was alive, peaceful again, but Scylla's mind was elsewhere. The princess who had once believed in fear and power now saw a different path, a path of understanding and unity. She had learned this from a place she hadn't expected, the human beside her. Daniel had been there, not just in the battles, but in the quiet moments, guiding her, challenging her, helping her to see the world through a different lens. His words, his calm demeanor, his unwavering belief in her, it had all meant more than she could have known at the time. Her thoughts were interrupted as Daniel approached, standing beside her. The quiet hum of the city's lights was a distant background to their conversation. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but filled with relief. "Cal's reign of terror is finished." Scylla nodded, but there was a slight sadness in her eyes. "It's not just over for him. It's over for the way I've ruled for so long. I thought power came from strength, from fear, but it doesn't. It comes from trust. It comes from leading with your heart, not just your sword." Daniel turned to face her, his expression softening. "You've come a long way, princess. You've changed, and that's something no one can take from you." Scylla smiled faintly, feeling the weight of his words. She hadn't expected to be changed by a human, let alone one she had dismissed so quickly. But Daniel had become something more than just a soldier or an ally. He had become her teacher, her partner. And perhaps more than that, he had become her friend. "What happens now?" she asked, her gaze returning to the city. "I can't leave the empire the way I thought I would, but I still have a responsibility. To my people." Daniel's voice was steady, sure. "You'll lead them in a way they've never had before, with strength, but with compassion. You're not the same princess you were before, and that's a good thing." Scylla looked at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite explain. "I don't think I could have done this without you, Daniel. You changed everything for me. You made me see that there's more to life than just conquering. You made me see that being strong isn't enough. It's about understanding. It's about leading with integrity." Daniel met her gaze and smiled, a simple, genuine smile that made her heart race. "I just helped you see what was already inside you, princess. You were always capable of it." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Scylla knew this was just the beginning. The empire would need to heal, and she would have to prove herself in ways she never had before. But now she wasn't alone. She turned back to the city, her eyes filled with new purpose. "I'm ready," she said softly, "ready to lead." Daniel stood beside her, a quiet confidence in his posture. "Then let's go. Together." Silera looked at him once more, her heart full. She had always been strong, but now she knew what true strength was. It wasn't in the battles she fought or the enemies she defeated. It was in the people she trusted, the bonds she forged, and the love she shared with those who believed in her. And in Daniel, she had found someone who believed in her from the start. Together, they would change the future of the Xanthari Empire, and together, they would change the galaxy.